A story the West never wanted you to hear. They said it couldn't be done. They said Africa could never build without the West. No IMF loans, no USAID projects, no EU funding strings attached. But one man, Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, just proved them all wrong. A massive canal project, something so ambitious it stunned the world, is now rising without a single dollar from Western institutions. This is not just about water. It's not just about construction. It's about freedom. It's about an African nation standing tall, defying centuries of dependency, and showing the world that Africa doesn't need permission to dream or to build. And today, we're going to uncover the full story, how this project was born, why Traoré rejected Western offers, and how a canal, yes, a canal, has become the symbol of a new African independence movement. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll see why this one canal is shaking the foundations of global power. Why this story matters more than you think. When you hear canal, you might imagine just water flowing from point A to point B. But in geopolitics, canals have always been symbols of power. The Suez Canal connected Europe to Asia, and nations fought bloody wars to control it. The Panama Canal changed world trade forever. And now, in West Africa, a new canal is rising, one that is not under Western control. This is why the world is watching Traoré. Because history tells us, whoever controls the canal controls the economy. Whoever controls the economy controls the nation. Burkina Faso may not be rich in Western terms, but it is rich in spirit, rich in people, and now rich in determination to chart its own course. That's why this canal isn't just shocking the world. It's threatening to rewrite the rules of global development, the weight of the past, how IMF and USAID shaped Africa. To understand why this canal matters, we need to understand what came before. For decades, Africa was trapped in what experts call the debt cycle. The IMF, the World Bank, USAID, and the EU would come in with money, loans, grants, aid, but the fine print always had chains attached. Nations had to cut public spending, sell their resources at cheap prices, open their markets for foreign companies. And in the end, they were left weaker, not stronger. Burkina Faso, like many African nations, lived this reality. Generations saw their governments bend under the weight of debt. Projects stalled, dreams delayed, progress hijacked. But now something different is happening. Traoré isn't just rejecting money. He's rejecting the entire model. And that's why the West is nervous. Who is Traoré, the unexpected leader who shook Africa? Before this canal project, many outside Africa had never heard of Captain Ibrahim Traoré. He was young, only in his 30s, a soldier, a revolutionary. In 2022, he led a dramatic change of power in Burkina Faso, promising to put the people first. Some called it risky, others called it bold, but very few believed he would last. And yet, here he is, not only surviving, but thriving. Not only governing, but reshaping the destiny of his nation. The canal is the clearest symbol yet of his vision, because he knows true independence is not about speeches, it's about building something real. The birth of the Canal Project, a dream or a necessity. So why a canal? Burkina Faso is landlocked. That means no access to the ocean, no seaports. Every drop of imported goods has to come through neighbors. This makes trade slow, expensive, and vulnerable. A canal changes that equation. A canal means direct access to regional trade, irrigation for farmlands, fresh water for communities, energy generation, and a new symbol of independence. For Traoré, this was not a luxury project. It was survival. It was sovereignty. It was a line in the sand. We will no longer wait for the West to decide our future. And so, the plan was set in motion. The shock decision, rejecting the West's help when word of the Canal Project first leaked, the IMF and Western agencies quickly circled. Partnership offers came in. Consultants flew in. Proposals filled with promises landed on Traoré's desk. But buried in every single one was the same poison pill. Massive debt that would bind Burkina Faso for decades. Control clauses giving foreign powers oversight. Privatization demands that would strip the canal from the people and hand it to corporations. And that's when Traoré did something almost no African leader has dared to do. He said no. No to IMF loans. No to USAID technical assistance. No to EU infrastructure grants tied to resource contracts. For the first time in modern history, a major project of this scale in Africa would rise without a single Western hand on the blueprint. Who funds the canal? Then, the African answer. Here's the question the world asked. If not the West, then who? The answer shocked even experts. Instead of turning to Paris, Washington, or Brussels, Traoré turned to African regional banks willing to fund homegrown projects. Private. Investors within Africa, many from the Sahel region, who believed in the vision. Community contributions, where ordinary citizens invested small sums, knowing this canal would feed their future. And in whispers, some say new allies from Asia and the Middle East quietly stepped in, not with strings, but with steel, machinery, and manpower. This cocktail of funding sources created something the West hates most, a project they cannot control. Why the canal terrifies the West in paper, it's just water. But in reality, this canal represents something much bigger, loss of influence. For decades, the IMF and USAID have used infrastructure as a leash. If one nation proves it can build without them, others may follow. Strategic independence. Burkina Faso will no longer need to beg for trade routes or port access. Regional unity. If this canal succeeds, neighboring African nations could join in, creating a trade bloc independent of Western oversight. And let's be clear, in geopolitics, influence is worth more than gold. That's why this canal is not just an engineering project. It's a revolution carved in stone and water, echoes of history, why canals change empires. If you think canals are just construction, history says otherwise. When the Suez Canal opened in 1869, it changed global trade forever. European powers rushed to control it, and wars were fought over it. When the Panama Canal was completed in 1914, it gave the United States unprecedented global reach, shaping the 20th century. Today, the Burkina Canal may sound small compared to these giants. But make no mistake, for Africa, this is a Suez moment, because for the first time, an African canal is being built for Africans, by Africans, without colonial fingerprints. The People's Canal, national pride in action. What shocked the world most was not the engineering, it was the spirit. Burkina Faso's citizens, many of them farmers and traders, rallied behind the project. They volunteered labor. They donated tools. Some even gave up land willingly, saying, "If this canal feeds our children, then let it pass through my farm." Instead of protests, there was pride. Instead of division, there was unity. Every stone laid, every trench dug became a symbol, not just of progress, but of a people reclaiming their destiny. In a world where so many projects are built with foreign logos and Western flags, the sight of local workers carving out a future with their own hands has inspired not just Burkina Faso, but the entire African continent. Breaking ground. The first dig that made headlines, the world first noticed when the ground broke. No Western contractors, no foreign engineers in white helmets leading the way. Instead, African engineers, African machines, African workers. The first dig was broadcast live on national TV. Crowds cheered, flags waved, and the message was clear. Burkina Faso was building its own destiny. That single moment, an excavator, bucket cutting into the earth, made headlines from Paris to Washington. Because the West realized this was not symbolic anymore, it was real. The West's first response, doubt and mockery at first, Western media did what they always do. They mocked, impossible, too costly, lack of expertise. They painted Traoré as a dreamer, a populist, chasing illusions. But what they underestimated was the power of belief. In the streets of Ouagadougou, people didn't see impossibility. They saw hope, and hope is stronger than skepticism. Within months, progress silenced the critics. The canal was no longer just a blueprint. It was taking shape, engineering the impossible, African ingenuity at work building. A canal is no small feat. It takes planning, precision, and technology. Without Western corporations, how did Burkina Faso manage? Local universities contributed. Engineers trained abroad who returned home with knowledge. African innovators designed cost-cutting techniques using local materials. Allied nations quietly provided heavy equipment at discounted prices. Avoiding IMF channels, community labor brigades worked shifts, blending tradition with modern machinery. This was not just construction, it was collaboration. Every step proved that African ingenuity could rival and even outperform the West. Whispers of new allies. Who's helping behind the scenes? Though Traoré rejected Western aid, whispers suggest others saw opportunity. China, already known for building infrastructure across Africa, may have supplied equipment. Turkey, hungry for influence, may have offered contractors. Middle Eastern partners may have funneled silent investment. None of this is officially confirmed. But one thing is certain. The world's rising powers smell change. And they know that an Africa building, for itself, is an Africa worth aligning with. For the West, this is a nightmare, because every shovel of dirt is proof that their monopoly is ending. Western pressure mounts, sanctions and smears. As progress accelerated, pressure grew. Western think tanks published reports warning of corruption risks. Foreign newspapers painted Traoré as a dictator. Rumors of sanctions spread. Some aid programs were suddenly paused. It was textbook Western strategy. If you can't control it, try to crush it. But Traoré didn't flinch. Instead, he told the world, Burkina Faso will eat less if we must, but we will build with our own hands. That line went viral across Africa. It was no longer just a canal. It was a declaration of independence. The canal as a weapon of unity. Soon, neighboring nations took notice. Mali, Niger, Guinea. Countries also rejecting Western dominance began to talk. Could this canal be connected across borders? Could it spark a network of trade routes beyond Western control? Suddenly, the canal was not just Burkina Faso's project. It was Africa's dream. Meetings were held, flags exchanged. Talks of a Pan-African infrastructure alliance began to circulate. The West feared a domino effect, because unity is the one thing colonial powers always tried to prevent. Africa's answer to the Suez Canal. If the Suez connected Europe to Asia, the Burkina Canal could connect Africa to itself. Imagine, farmers in Mali sending produce directly through water routes, traders in Niger accessing markets without foreign, ports, communities along the canal thriving with fishing, farming, and energy. For the first time, Africa would not just be a source of raw materials. It would be a hub of its own trade, and that is the real revolution. The people's stories, lives transformed. Overnight behind the politics, real people felt the change. A farmer once dependent on rainfall now irrigates his land year-round. Fisherman who once traveled days to reach markets now sells directly along the canal. A young student finds work as a technician on the project instead of leaving for Europe. These stories spread fast. They weren't statistics. They were proof that independence wasn't just theory. It was food on the table. It was dignity restored. Western panic. The propaganda war by now, the canal could no longer be ignored. So the West switched tactics. They launched a propaganda war. Articles claimed the canal would cause environmental disaster. Analysts predicted collapse within 5 years. Commentators accused Traoré of authoritarianism. But here's the truth. If the canal had been funded by the IMF, these same voices would be praising it as Africa's modernization. The hypocrisy was exposed, and Africans noticed. The canal as a symbol of a new Africa. By its halfway mark, the canal was already more than concrete and water. It had become a symbol of resistance. Every brick rejected dependency. Every trench dug was a blow against exploitation. Every drop of water that flowed reminded Africans, we can build, we can rise, we can thrive. The first time in decades, Africa was not waiting for permission. It was building its own destiny, and the world was forced to watch. Nearing completion. The world holds its breath as months turn to years. Progress could no longer be hidden. Satellite images showed the canal stretching like a scar across the land. Western analysts who once mocked it now whispered nervously, "They're actually doing it." Burkina Faso had crossed the point of no return. This canal was no longer a dream. It was destiny being carved into the earth. And the closer it came to completion, the more the world held its breath. Every great project demands sacrifice. Workers endured blistering heat. Villages relocated to make way for the canal. Resources were stretched thin. But through it all, one thing never broke: the spirit of the people. Traoré himself was seen at the construction sites. Not in a palace, not behind a desk, but standing in the dust with workers. That image, the president with mud on his boots, became legendary. It reminded people, this was not just a leader's project. It was the nation's project, the West's. Last move, divide and distract. Desperate to stop the project, the West turned to its oldest tactic: division. Rumors of internal conflicts were spread. Ethnic tensions were stoked. Foreign media claimed civil war was looming. But unlike the past, Burkina Faso stood united. The canal had become too important, too symbolic, too powerful to let division destroy it. The West had underestimated one thing. When people taste true independence, they will defend it with everything they have. The grand opening. A nation. Reborn. And then it happened. The canal was complete. Water rushed through its gates for the first time. Crowds lined the banks. Flags waved high. Songs filled the air. The world watched live as Traoré cut the ribbon. But this wasn't just a ceremony. It was a rebirth. Burkina Faso was no longer landlocked in spirit. It was free, and the canal was proof carved in stone and water. Global shockwaves, a new chapter in world politics. The day after the opening, reactions poured in. African nations celebrated. Leaders sent messages of support, calling it a new dawn. The West issued cautious statements, carefully avoiding praise, but unable to ignore the achievement. Global markets took note. Trade maps were redrawn, supply chains reconsidered. The shockwaves had begun. One canal in West Africa had shaken the very foundations of global power. The canal's impact on everyday life beyond politics, life began to change. Farmers produced more crops than ever before. Traders reached new markets without relying on expensive, foreign routes. Children who once dreamed of leaving Africa now dreamed of building within it. The canal was more than a waterway. It was a lifeline. It turned scarcity into abundance, dependency into independence, and despair into hope. The new African dream, copycats. Rise soon, whispers turned into plans. Mali began drafting its own canal blueprint. Niger announced major infrastructure projects without IMF backing. Even coastal nations looked inward. realizing they too could build without permission. The Burkina Canal had become a model, a spark lighting fires across the continent. This was not just one nation's victory. It was Africa's awakening, the West's silence, defeat without admitting it. The West, humiliated, shifted to silence. No congratulations, no recognition, just silence, because to acknowledge the canal's success would be to admit failure. To admit that the IMF model was broken, to admit that Africa could rise without them. And for once, the silence was louder than words. Traoré's legacy, the leader who shocked the world. What will history remember? Not just the canal, not just the engineering, but the courage of a leader who dared to say no. The courage of a people who believed in themselves. The courage of a continent that refused to bow. Traoré may be young, but his name is already etched in history. Not as a politician, not as a soldier, but as the man who proved Africa could build without chains. The final shock, a message to the world. So here we are. A canal, built with no IMF loans, no USAID contracts, no EU strings, just vision, just determination, just Africa rising. And now the world is forced to ask itself, if Burkina Faso can do this, what else can Africa achieve? This is why Traoré's canal doesn't just shock the world, it terrifies it. Because the old order is crumbling, and a new future, bold, independent, unstoppable, is flowing like water across the heart of Africa. And this is just the beginning, because if one nation can rise, others will follow. The question is not if Africa will shock the world again, but when. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, stories the mainstream won't show you, then make sure to subscribe right now. Hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming next.